Great. Am I muted? No. Everybody, good. Thank you all very much. It's going to be fantastic. So I sent around a quick email to everybody about an hour or so ago. I've watched with great interest the presentation, so I hope this will be a really good session. My job, I think, is only to encourage all of you to talk. So what I'm going to do to start with is ask those of you who've made a presentation to ideally at least summarize it for people who haven't perhaps seen it, but also to set out a few ideas of things you'd like to talk about. Then the panelists who are here who haven't made a presentation to either react to what they've heard or to give some other areas to explore and head into. But what I'd like, I mean, the ideal I think is for people watching to think they're in, well, maybe not the pub, but somewhere a bit more informal where you all get a chance to talk and bounce off each other. So the more you say, the better. I'll have done my job if you don't hear from me until I say thank you at the very end. Some of you will want to wave to get my attention, but the little chat box, I'll keep an eye on that. I'll have that open here. So if at any point you want to jump in, please do. As you all know, when there are conversations, sometimes the topic moves. So jump in early. And I don't mind, you know, we're all friends. I can't imagine, I've been on a few panels where things haven't gone quite according to plan. And one where two of the panelists refused to speak to the others afterwards. But I don't think that's going to be us today. So please don't prove me wrong. But I'm going to ask Elaine, who gave the terrific keynote, to speak first, and then I'll call you out, but just to talk for a few minutes. That would be terrific. I don't know. I know we're recording. I'm not sure if we're live. If Stephen is going to come back into the room, or whether I start introducing you. Stephen, there you are.
Hi. I'm quite willing just to stay out completely if that works.
Do we just kick off as and when, or?
I think you can kick off now. Perfect.
Okay. I've got a dog who's crying to get out of my study, and I promise you,
I've got one of those.
Well, crying to get back in. But let me.
Okay. Good.
Shall I start talking?
Well, I should introduce. I suppose it's true. It's going to take a while to introduce everybody, particularly with your very distinguished biography. So I think we should start. I think. Why not I'll introduce you by name, but I won't go into any more details. But first, Elaine Trahan from Stanford is going to talk, and then I'm going to, for those who weren't just listening now, we're going to hear from the panelists, those who gave presentations, and then other panelists. And as I've mentioned before, the chat box is open, so any questions, please jump in. But I would aim to have a discussion amongst ourselves, and then have sort of the last 15 minutes or so for Q&A from anybody out there in the ether. So Elaine, why don't you take us away? The future of scholarship, dark archives. How do we understand the past better? How do we understand the present and the future as well?
Thanks, Peter. Yes, Elaine Trahan from Yellow Skied Stanford, but actually really from Aberystwyth, and so I just a plug for my hometown. So, I mean, it strikes me that the global lockdown, the open access to huge amounts of scholarship and professional thinking that we've seen in the last 6 or so months has actually kind of provided different ways of doing things and different ways of beginning to think through what constitutes the future of scholarship. And particularly, I suppose my key thing is I'm going to talk a little bit about collaboration. It's really remarkable, and I think Lisa talked about this, Lisa Fagan-Davis, that where dark archives would have happened in Oxford, which would be very nice. Nevertheless, you know, you might have live streamed 1 or 2 things, but I don't think many conferences have really ever been used to the kind of publics that we have seen. It strikes me as something that is beneficial and that we may not want to just set aside as soon as travel and proximity indoors is possible again. I think it has the opportunity to allow us to be more collaborative. I have worried for quite some time, and perhaps it's a result of moving from the UK over here and all of my research networks still being basically in the UK. Collaboration's been at the forefront of just my professional existence for at least, I think it's probably the last 20 or more years. And I think we are at a point now where we must recognize that we cannot do everything ourselves. And yet, of course, we in order to get promoted or in order to be acknowledged, there are certain things that one has to do on one's own. I still think that's a pity. I like the increase in co-authored books that is happening. I really admire colleagues who are so collaborative that their generosity really sparks new generations of thought and brings younger scholars into the field. So Heinrich asked in the last session, what are the chances for closer collaboration? And she's thinking not just among scholars, but also among professionals of all kinds in arts and humanities. I think it's one of the only ways that we're going to survive outside of the elite institutions in years to come will be through collaborative endeavours that bring in expertises that are generous in the yielding of ideas, which is incredibly difficult for us since our commodity is our ideas generation. I think you have to be willing to put your ideas out there for others to use in your collaborative teams, and with a concomitant kind of acknowledgement of each other's work. I am concerned at the moment that we're not listening to each other, and that in our kind of referencing of each other's work, reference is not wrangling with, reference is putting something in the footnotes and then moving on with the thing you were going to say anyway. And I'm worried about both collaboration and about kind of listening, because the pace at which we operate now, and especially when it's metricized as it is in the work scholarship is metricized as it is in the UK, the pace at which we're functioning is not really allowing individuals to think and to listen and to take on board what others are saying. And this is critical. We're at a critical juncture in relation to our cultural heritage, our understanding of our cultural heritage, the way that we can train our younger colleagues, the hours that we can spend providing in-depth training on things that might seem arcane in the current world and at the current pace. Catherine Karkoff edited a book called Slow Scholarship, and I know that that's been a movement. I think that is really important. And in terms of cultural heritage, archives in particular, there cannot be anything more important than slow scholarship. And that slow scholarship will allow us to provide training, but also to retrain ourselves to think and to work in more, and it's interesting that Peter is chairing this panel as Professor of Global History. It'll allow us to think more broadly about what we do in relation to other cultures, other languages, other archival sets. It's really, for me, my age, my advanced years, it's really slightly terrifying to think I can't just talk about English manuscripts from 1150 to 1160 anymore. I really have to broaden my approach, broaden my thinking. Oh God, do I have to learn, I know, Chinese? I don't necessarily think that that's what we're asking of scholars, but an appreciation and an understanding of representation of different cultures, of issues to do with race, and providing ourselves with a training of critical race theory, for example. Those things are absolutely crucial at the moment if we are to continue to bring to the fore the world's global cultural heritages and the significance that they have for bringing as Peter said, the past into the present. I'll leave it there really. So it's collaboration and listening and pace, and then technology's a whole other thing. And I've talked quite a bit about that already. I'll leave it there. Thank you, Peter.
Thanks, Elaine. And can I just follow straight up? Because I mean, it's something you talked about in your keynote as well. The problems and the fetishism of counting things and of measuring by volume, that's a sort of signifier of, well, that it should be a signifier of anything is already you're setting a agenda that is deeply complicated because it provides all sorts of different implicit values. But I mean, it's interesting that you see that both as a problem as a medievalist, but also as a contemporary scholar and how we're measured. I mean, there's of course a terrible irony in all of that. But do you think that that's something that we can actually even fight against? I mean, is it a losing battle, at least in terms of trying to think through? I mean, I love the idea of slow scholarship, and I absolutely couldn't agree more about the paying of debts and acknowledging each other's work in more than the throwaway line in a footnote. I completely agree about how to do that. But I mean, it'd be great to hear what you think immediately. I mean, we'll talk about it too, but about whether there's actually a way through on that too, before I then turn to Michael Sargent maybe to come in next. But do you have any immediate sort of reaction to those comments?
I do think there is we talk about critical turns all the time in the field now. I don't remember that being a thing until about like 10 or maybe 15 years ago, but I think there is a turn away from the overabundance of publication. That's 600 books in 6,000, whatever it was, books in one day that publishers were having to publish. Was it this Tuesday because of the stasis, the stag created by the pandemic? More scholarly textbooks in one day than the rest of the whole of humanity has ever known. I do think there is going to be a shift. I think we can work against that. I think you can maintain output now in different ways. I think there's a broader understanding of what constitutes output. I think there's a broader acceptance of a kind of social media and media savviness and the significance that has for scholarship more broadly. And so I think the more that one can make these points in public fora, the more likely it is that we'll be able to embed that in our practices and in an appreciation of our practices. So yes, I do think there's a turn against numbers, against metricization. Maybe that's optimistic. Anyway, thank you.
No, it would be great, I think, in the discussion to come back to that about public facing scholarship and how to best do that. And that has its own rules and challenges and opportunities too. But can I next ask Michael Sargent from City University in New York? Are you happy to go next, Michael, and give us your thoughts on the state of the field, following up from your excellent talk as well? Sorry, it's the buzz phrase from lockdown. You've got to unmute yourself. You did unmute yourself. You have to unmute yourself again, I'm afraid. Sorry, Michael.
Right.
That's it. No.
Right. All right. Is that good? There. Good. All right. It's interesting, the idea of a critical turn and a turn against metricization, because in fact, a lot of what I do in putting together textual argument is looking at numbers and proportions of agreements among groups of manuscripts and so on like that, so that there's a lot of just computation that goes on behind the scenes in my own work. And yet when the thing has to be produced, then of course the measure among my colleagues and so on is, am I in dialogue with current critical theory, which at least in the City University is a very, very big thing. It was early on and it continues to be. So it's an interesting dialogue going on even within producing the work itself. And I was really kind of interested in the makeup of this session, because of course the other papers are all by people who are sort of at the expanding edges of what can we do digitally, crowdsourcing, just, you know, or semantic analysis, just all of the tools that have become available to us. And it's interesting the way that people are picking them up and saying, wait a second, this tool has an applicability for the project I'm working on. And there's a lot of, as I say, sort of at the expanding edge of what we can do with digital media and so on. And of course, what I'm doing in its basis is very retro. I mean, that I'm generally what I do is considered pretty retro by my colleagues and so on like that. It's sort of, you're still collating manuscripts. Does anyone do that anymore? And you're still looking at manuscripts. Does anyone do that anymore? Most of my colleagues work from printed editions that, as far as they're concerned, that's the text. And so it's interesting how that one works. And yet, just through the circumstances of producing, particularly the scale edition, the solution to a difficult, I mean, the problem is that I took over two projects that had been worked on for decades by other people. And I'm sort of completing the projects and yet having to redo them to a large extent because they were all done in recension. And in Middle English, at any rate, I don't think anyone is publishing recensionist editions anymore. In Middle English, as a matter of fact, we have all gone back to best text, and which is really interesting. I think the large effect of the Athlone Piers Plowman is that no one has the nerve to present an argument based on a large number of manuscripts anymore. So everybody is going for pick a best text, edit that. And the way out of that conundrum for me was to look at current cultural theory for ways to envisage, well, how do I want to present this material and what are the implications of that? So it's really interesting. I'm sort of coming at the same kind of issues, but from a different direction than the other people in the panel. I thought it was a really, it was really cool to be in a panel with these other presentations. So yeah, so I'll pass it back at this point.
Michael, what, again, just an immediate follow-up. Do you think that challenge then of picking the best and the ripest fruit on the tree because it's shiny and easier to do and so on, does that shapes the way that we engage with the past in a very different way? Because there are fewer rewards for the old-fashioned spade work, which isn't glamorous, isn't exciting, doesn't yield the zippy new conclusions. Is that something that worries you? It
doesn't get you tenure very quickly. At least, I mean, that's the practical problem. If you undertake a project that's going to take you 10 years to complete, your department is going to make a tenure decision in 3 to 5 years, and you need to have a book out. So there's that aspect of it. There's also, there are a number of people whose attitude is there is all of this stuff that must be put in print because nobody can read it. And so therefore go for as quick a presentation as you can. So there are a couple of other things that feed into that. I've lost my train of thought. Oh well.
It's just the pressure to deliver quick results. And, you know, as those of us who are in the academics,
yeah, that's part of it. And as I say, the other thing is, well, what tool am I going to use to digest all of this material when what the market is looking for is a paperback undergraduate form of the text that doesn't report any of the readings of any of the other manuscripts. I mean, your thing of picking the shiniest fruit reminded me of a bit in C.S. Lewis's Perelandra, where the Voyage to Venus, where he plucks a fruit and starts to eat it, and realizes that in this pre-fallen world, he doesn't immediately notice another fruit and say, oh, that one would have been better. That he is immediately satisfied by the one he plucked. And there's always, I mean, to this day, I still look at the text that I chose and I say to myself, I was right, wasn't I? Because there were 2 or 3 other candidates that would have presented a slightly different book that are worth doing. And then, of course, what that leads to and has led to for me is there a way that we could present all of the voices? Because an editorial construct of the author's text is in fact the editor's text. And what we have, the voices that are actually speaking are various. And as I've tried to I think in fact that variance is the normal state of text. And that we're trying to, the traditional critical edition is possibly a betrayal of the text. So anyhow, I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, I think that's that again, that's a good and important topic to come back to about how tenure boards, what kind of voices we should be giving. I mean, I think everybody on this panel, everybody watching, is entirely sympathetic to the challenges that our subject, and particularly medieval studies and so on, tends to have. Very different, perhaps, to the technical skills that need to be acquired. And I chose shiny fruit rather than tasty fruit carefully, because we all know shiny fruit is the one that never really tastes very good. It's always worth looking around the other side of the tree.
How true.
Why don't I come to Zoe from University of Cardiff. Do you want to pick up, Zoe, and come next with some ideas and thoughts too about the kinds of things we should be thinking about, worrying about, or even if there's any good news you see in front of you too?
Yeah, actually, I'm quite glad you came to me just then. Hello, everyone, because the work I'm doing is actually echoing a lot of what Michael's just said about picking the shiny fruit versus picking the different flavors and the different options that you have available to you. So the work that I've been doing for my thesis is I'm looking at the medieval Welsh law texts, which is a quite massive corpus. For those that don't know, there's about 40 different manuscripts available from when the law was active and additional ones from after that period. And what I'm aiming to do is my focus is to make the texts more accessible, and through doing so facilitate transparent, expandable and replicable research. And the way I'm doing this is by applying XML encoding on like a semantic level, but also a structural level, to allow you to navigate through the whole corpus and examine it on different levels of granularity. So the actual application of tools that I've done is just a selection of tools to sort of showcase what can be done with this formatting of the text and this this way of looking at the text, not as the best text or one text, but as an entire body, and being able to sort and search through them at will. Yeah, and all in all, I'm echoing a lot of what Michael's just said just there.
And do you find it, Zoe, when you think about what is the most difficult and challenging thing, is it because you feel you're reinventing the wheel yourself? Is it the technical side? Is it the digital side? Is it the interpretation side? How do you balance those in terms of your improvement as a scholar, what you're learning, and how you then teach your share your conclusions with others in similar positions or coming up behind you?
It is quite difficult to balance between them. I came from a bit of a strange background in that I am Celtic trained. So when I first came to all the digital humanities side of things, it was a very strange and different world. But thankfully through outside work that I'd done, I actually got a bit of coding experience, and that sort of helped along. But it is very intimidating when you first come to giant screens of code. But it's actually not, it's no different from looking at a manuscript. It's got a structure, it's got a way of speaking. It's, to me, it's very Latinate in the way that the code is built. It works in like the same structure. You have to have certain things following other things, or it doesn't make sense. So it's a different world, but one that's not, it's a mere half step away from what we do as medievalists, in my opinion. And
but is the technical side, is it something which has to be bespoke because these are your 40 texts and they're unique and distinct, or is there a kind of skeleton that in due course you can imagine that the technical side could apply to other groups of texts and that they could plug into each other?
Definitely. What I've done is bespoke for the text that I've been using, but it's actually laying the groundwork for some semi or fully automatic ones that could encode the manuscripts themselves. So bringing in, I think some other people spoke about neural networks and how you can use machine learning and intelligence to help inform the processes and inform the tools and methods that you can use to examine these texts. So by having a large training corpus, you can then teach the computer to say, this is this word, this is the one I would recommend, or these are the series of words I'd recommend to encode this new manuscript. And whether that's fully automatic or you have some sort of user intervention to help correct the computer, it can then learn from any corrections that are made and propagate further. So again, that's possibly going into the crowdsourcing aspects of the other papers.
And just quickly, because I might, you never know how the discussions go. How rewarding is it? I mean, how do you enjoy it? Is it tough? Is it something that you feel that you make progress on a regular basis? Do you feel you have enough support from others around you who either do or don't quite understand what it is that you're trying to do? How's the journey for you?
It has been tough at times because a lot of what I've done has been manual. So it's an 800,000 word corpus that I've manually encoded, or semi-manually. I've had some automated elements to it. So it's taken a lot of time and it's been a slog. But seeing all of the figures and the visualizations and all these beautiful new bits of information coming out of it that I've not seen anywhere else in the scholarship is so rewarding and made it 100% worthwhile.
Good. Well, that's a very good upbeat answer. It's great. Can I come to Ulrike Wuttke and see if Ulrike could give us some input too on your experiences of Dutch literature and so on.
Okay. Yes. Thanks. Hello. I managed to unmute myself before I started speaking, so that I get an extra point, hopefully. Yeah, it's wonderful to be in this round, and I'm really humbled because I'm speaking more or less from the other side. So I have been trained as a medievalist, that's true, but I'm now much deeper involved for quite a long time in the infrastructure building point of view. And it's always very rewarding to have this communication with the actual scholars. And you have said in your talks and already in this discussion so many important points that I almost don't know where to start. But some stipulations I would like to repeat from my short talk are that I have tried to address more or less a vision. So what do I think scholarship should look like? What effects will have this lockdown situation have on scholarships? Are there any positive lessons we can learn from this new situation and maybe getting more involved with digital experiences? And will it lead to a more thoroughly, more deeper embedding of digital practices based on an open science paradigm? And I called this a participatory, open, digital enhanced paradigm. So it's not only about, we say, rocket science, digital humanities, you know, with AI and very difficult stuff and screens full of code, but on very different levels. And I'm very happy to hear this address of collaboration so often reflected in the talks, in your comments, and also hearing very well the problems of this collaboration. And I see also not only the problems maybe between researchers, but also the problems collaborating and cooperating with the people who build digital infrastructures. And so hearing Elaine, yes, of course, collaboration is very, very important, and we do need much more time to listen to each other, to talk to each other, also from these point of views. So scholars and I say the infrastructure people talking and listening to each other. But it also means, and I think that's a problem, it needs resources. You have to have the time to have this discourse, and this needs support, and this whole thinking process needs support. And I think this is a big address on funders, because using digital infrastructures needs infrastructures that are shaped by scholarly needs, and they also have to be trusted. And if you use a tool and you're not 100% sure, I mean, you are building for a future that is not 1 year, but 10 years or 20 years, this tool can be trusted. The data will be safe. You maybe shy away from using it at all. And so the problem of sustainability is a very huge problem in this field. And we also need even more experiments. We have to be able to fail, to build stuff that doesn't work, because we can only learn from those experiences as well. And I just thought about, there has been an article, there was something about a repository, and they talked a lot with the scholars, and then they said, yeah, we built it and nobody came. That was a big failure in their eyes, of course. But I'm also thinking, now we build it, but now they come, and what are they doing with it? And maybe they are doing something very different we didn't expect, and now we have to change what we build. So we have to be agile. And if we are only working on this short-term money, the funding, we are not even sure we can maintain the tools. Speaking of changing is profoundly to address better the needs of the scholars. So that's my take. It's not really what I talked about in my video, but you watched it anyway. So I'm happy to hear your thoughts on this.
Can I straight, my immediate question, Ulrike, for you is it's a very good point about the long-term sustainability and projects that have their shelf life for however long it might be, 5 years, even 10 years at the long run, but they provide data and infrastructure that could survive for generations. How does one try to, I mean, we're having a session after this with some of the major donors in this world. How does one try to price the support that's required, you know, even if it's very light and for cloud services or for basic maintenance? The digital humanities projects that I've been involved in, some of which have had multi-years and in some cases more than 10 years running, you know, we all know it's not easy to get 1,000 or 2 from our own departments or from our universities, let alone from outside donors, because if they're new donors, they typically find that kind of resource boring because it's not new, it's not shiny, it's not doing something that doesn't already exist. From your perspective, should we be thinking better when we submit proposals about a much longer time frame of just getting the work done, and in terms of its preservation, how do we try to anticipate changes to infrastructure so that we don't build these projects that are digital, open access, and then they die, and then they do disappear?
You have an hour, or you want a short answer?
We've got an hour and 10 minutes. You won't annoy me if you keep going. Other panelists, I'm not so sure, but give us a couple of thoughts, I think, Ulrike, on that. I mean, we know there's no straight answer, but how would you try to guide us and others through that kind of process?
I mean, I'm very much involved in data management planning, which sounds sometimes very boring, but I think this is exactly what you are talking about, and is it exactly a very exciting topic, because then you have to think, you always have to think when you start your project, where you want to go, how do you want to achieve it, what are the resources you need, and what is the best possible at this point of time, what you know, technical solution to use. You have to think about sustainable data formats. You have to think about, okay, my project runs for 3 years. Where do my data go? I want maybe open data, or maybe the data cannot be as open. I have to close some of them, so I have to prepare for that. I have to scale into my project money already the money to run the project further, or to donate my data to a trustworthy repository. And of course, also the repository has to make a calculation, and this is not very easy. It's a, I wouldn't say it's a unsolvable problem, but the pricing of this long-term curation of data is not completely solved. But of course, you need people behind it, and the people cost a lot of money, because you need specialists who for the data curation. But I think if you start from the perspective that you're not only building for 2 years, and that your data are provided as open as possible, access, but also technically, so not using proprietary formats and stuff like that. And then you also have to count in the time for the documentation of your data and the metadata. And I was really interested, because you have been also, I mean, some of the talks I have listened to talking a lot of this rapid digitization with very few metadata, and just put stuff online. And I think, as exciting as it sounds, for digital humanities, I think it's almost a nightmare, because it's maybe it's only me, and you can of course contradict. Of course, it depends on the research scenario. Do you want to just mimic a analog workflow, you know, looking at pictures, and or do you want to do computational stuff? And then you need also a different data quality, which probably costs more.
Fantastic. Well, I can see, because if I'm staring at my screen, I promise I'm not going to be checking my emails. There are quite a lot of comments that are coming up that I'll try to read out and ask us questions too when I'm peering at the side of my computer. But let's go to Rebecca, San-Martin, and to Pablo. I don't know how you want to do this, Rebecca, but why don't you come in next? While you're talking, and I'm be paying strict attention, I'll be just keeping an eye on what the comments. And sorry, those of you who haven't had responses, I'll do my best to kind of catch up and scoop up some of those and to bring them up to the speakers we've had so far. But Rebecca, do you want to come next?
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Peter. Well, in our project, in the project we are now doing work on, we are not really dealing with archives or manuscripts. We are building a wiki which edits the lives of women with a reputation for holiness from the end of the 15th century till the beginning of the 16th century. So we are talking about a different question. No, we are talking about editing manuscripts, but on a wiki, which kind of you can have a perception of a wiki as being an scientific tool. So we want to talk about that, but we think regarding transference of knowledge or dissemination of knowledge, we think this tool, the wiki, is very useful. So that's what Pablo and me wanted to prove with our presentation. And I don't know if you are convinced with that, but for us, it was very important. It was very important that not only the expert reader, but also a wider audience could have access to these women's life. These women were leaders at their times, and the only way most women could at that time. I mean, the religious area, and I think it's worthwhile to get to know them, not only for those interested in the history of religion, history of women, performative studies. Also, yes, because we are also outlining the design of a database on gestures and gesturality, but also to everyone who is interested in the past and in women who were important in the past, and in mystic tests, also in mystical tests. And so we have a small budget, I have to say, a very small budget. So and we don't have a big team working on this. We don't have a computer engineer who is building the wiki. So we are trying to make the most of it. I liked what Roger Martinez stated in his presentation yesterday. I mean, paraphrasing him, we are involved in a long-term commitment for future generations. I mean, we are in the beginning of the path. This is not a specialized or a very sophisticated product, this wiki. We know that. We hope the database will be in the future more sophisticated and more useful, but this for us is the first step. So I don't know if Pablo wants to add something more about our wiki. Pablo?
Yeah, thank you. Hello, everybody. Yes, I think our work tries to keep a difficult balance between the edition of a text, like everybody can, a scholar can use, and our dissemination objectives. We had more than 1,000 visitors, and I'm pretty sure everybody wasn't a scholar there. But the main problem for me is that one that Michael Sargent, no Michael by the way, pointed out, is that when you make an edition, you are creating another text. And in fact, I think one of the problems of our wikis, and this is about challenges in the future, is that we are not taking in this first step, at least, the materiality of the text into account. We wanted to disseminate those texts because the access was very difficult before that. For example, we have 2 manuscripts which are in the Biblioteca, the Royal Library Les Escorial in Spain, and these are not digitized. And these are 2 books on lives of women from the 16th century, and we had to do it quick. We had to do a quick edition on that. We had to make something legible for the people, approachable, and we did it. And we have the text, and that's the first step. We are thinking for the future to include ecological files, to metadata on every one of the texts, because I have been, I don't know, as a user of this wiki, I have been working with that lately, and I can see that there is an hermeneutic gap. You really need information that is not on our page, on our tool, to make a good interpretation. I mean, a correct interpretation, a good approach to the text. I mean, so we need to deal with that, and we are doing it in the future. But I want to address something. I think in these days, there is something in the air, an idea that Elaine today in her keynote pointed. It's this idea of the superabundance, the superabundance. She said that this is a Neoplatonic term. We know it. It's the mystics we work with use that term, and I think this refers to this overwhelming feeling that all of us are having when we face the internet, when we face the digitization projects, when we face all the open access libraries, all the articles we can read, all the manuscripts we can watch from our computers. I think this is a nightmare, as a kind of nightmare. Sorry, as Ulrike pointed also, because we're not talking here about something that a human can apprehend. We are talking here about something much more bigger than the human comprehension. It's the Library of Babel, as Michael Sargent pointed also. What we try to do with this wiki, which is something very simple but effective, is to make an editorial work where we took a bunch of texts which were spread in different miscellanea manuscripts, printed books, etc., to take those texts and edited them with a very clear editorial criteria, which was these women were important at their time because they were Sante Vive, and this is a concept from Gabriela Zarri. So when you do that, you take that superabundance and you put it in human terms, so everybody can read the lives of those women. And yes, it's little, but it's important because it's done at a human level, and we can access them with a computer. Everybody can access that, and everybody can read that. And of course, this is the first step, but well, it's a good first step. Yeah.
Yeah.
Sure.
I was just thinking while Pablo was speaking. For example, I got, it was very difficult for me, but I wanted to visit a Dominican convent in Avila. And in the end, I got permission. So I kind of, well, I looked through the archive and I found the lives of Maria Santo Domingo. So they let me take photos with my mobile, which was very rudimentary, but they told me, please don't publish the images of the manuscript because we don't want people to come to visit. We don't want researchers, we don't want, so the only, I mean, I couldn't publish the images. The only way to make people know these texts was editing them. So it's a pity, but sometimes in Spain, conventional archives are very inaccessible. It's very difficult to find the text and to get to know the text. So this is a way. But
yes, it's a way. And a second subject I wanted to highlight. Elaine talked about the slow scholarship. Yeah, and yeah, this is something which is a must in the humanities. I mean, I have used editions of texts which have been made by people working on them. For example, the Speculum Simplicium Animarum, which Michael knows very well. So this edition, it's the edition. It has been the edition or the collation, which also Michael did. It took, I don't know, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years to Guarnieri and Verdeyen to finish that. But it has been a tool, and a tool that, at least for me and the people working on mysticism on the 13th or 14th centuries, has been like the tool to go through those texts. So a slow scholarship is a must, but how we deal with that? I mean, I can't deal with that because the pressures are terrible, because you need the numbers, because you need the numbers in your CV, because you need to be in the job market, because there are I don't know, hundreds of people with better with more articles than you, and you have to be in the 10 boards, and you need to do that and that and that. Yeah, in this context, how we do a slow scholarship. I mean, how I can edit a book of like the edition of the Mirror of Simple Souls. How I can do that? Nobody is paying me for doing that, and this is a real problem, I think.
Can I quickly just say that,
Sure.
yeah, slow scholarship is like an ideal, isn't it, where you can spend time reflecting. It's actually completely ridiculous. It's completely unreal. It does not reflect the appalling situation in which our younger colleagues are finding themselves, no jobs, and actually it is profoundly incumbent on senior colleagues, especially those with tenure or institutions that have clout like Oxford and Cambridge, to step in and stop this. So slow scholarship, the idea is wonderful, and paleographers have to kind of try and engage with it. I've never practiced it myself, and have written lots of things that are wrong, and there we go, so what? I think I could not agree with you more. And so I don't retract the idea of slow scholarship, but I think senior scholars have got to step in, step up, and change the way that this field is damaging the prospects and the lives of our younger colleagues.
Thank you, Elaine. Yeah, I agree with you. And yeah, this was our intervention. I don't know if Rebecca wanna add something or no. Okay.
I think that's very sobering and powerful stuff. I of course completely agree with Elaine. As it happens, and it's something which I'd like to talk about, I think, in the wider discussion at the end. You know, there are very significant imbalances geographically, as we all know, and the old arguments about Eurocentrism and so on and so forth. In my field, you know, I was to the eastern side of Europe and into the Middle East, into Central Asia and onwards. And because it's a much less populated field, the scholarship is slower. It's detrimental for all sorts of reasons. It means we're a long way behind. But there are multi-paces of what we're working on. So people working on Western medieval Europe, let's say, whichever, you know, pick a date you're comfortable with. It's a more populated, more aggressive, faster moving, much harder, and much higher levels of protection needed for outstanding young scholars. You don't have a choice if you want to come and become a Byzantinist or look at Syria in the 12th or 13th centuries, because there are a few people who've got the skills. It's the same thing you'll recognize of paleography and the material culture that you need to learn how to deal with, the numismatics, all these things that we pick up. But we're sharpening and getting better and better in how we're looking at the world in one small corner of it. But that progress isn't being mirrored in many other cases elsewhere. And that's also a very significant systemic challenge. So when we talk about the future of scholarship, we're embedding that privilege that we talk about in other kinds of discussions too, by focusing our resources, energy, positions, etc., on fine-tuning things that we already are quite good at, and we don't allocate attention to other parts of the world, and that distorts how we think about the past. That distorts how our faculties work. Still in the UK, more than 93% of history faculty are Western European-facing colleagues, and it requires a very substantial regrouping, I think, of how we think about scholarship, not just from the digital side, but how we try to even out how we look at the world. And some of those things from a European perspective is difficult. It's difficult to learn non-European languages, although it's not impossible. You know, you find very clever people in all over our continent who can speak languages that don't belong in their same language group. It's not so hard, but that starts also at school level. That starts with resources all the way down. And so those imbalances, which Elaine and you, Pablo, are exactly right to focus on our young colleagues, it's completely merciless. I've been evaluating a research fellowship competition today. There's no question I wouldn't have even made it through the first cut. The standard of young scholars working in this field is just mind-blowingly high. And it's thankless because we produce them and they're thrown out the other side. So we do need, I think, to think, as following Elaine's call, how do we, those of us who are higher up the food chain or older, or normally both, how do we try to make sure that we keep those doors open? And we need to do that very aggressively. No one is going to challenge us. I think everyone all agrees, but we haven't been very good at doing it. And so we need to do it in different ways and in much better ways too. So I think if there's something that you can talk to that when we have a discussion, that would be great. But I think Emma is the last one who's given a presentation, and then I'd like to come to our specialist, the brains that we brought in to do. I promised you I wouldn't do any talking, so I will promise I'll be quiet from now on. But Emma, would you like to have a go? And then maybe we go to Jane and Damon and Mike and Justin. That would be great. Thank you.
Thanks, Peter. Well, I've really enjoyed all the other contributions on the panel, and I have to say, there's so much richness. There's also lots of places where it overlaps. So, picking up on Elaine's comments on collaboration, I mean, one thing that I don't think any of us need convincing about is that collaboration is really important and it innovates, and no one disagrees on that. But what I do worry about intensely is that it's not always evident to people outside of academia how crucial that is to what we've been doing for a really long time, and how essential it is that that continues. And so to offer kind of, I suppose, I don't know, perhaps a reason to be hopeful and cheerful, I mentioned École 42 for a specific reason, because the model that they have used to teach young people how to code who haven't even finished their school qualifications has produced individuals who've gone on to have a fantastic career afterwards. What's interesting is the pedagogical model, because they're using virtual reward systems to encourage peer-to-peer learning. There aren't any teachers, but people are encouraged to apply. They even have an algorithm to try and encourage as many women to apply to this school, to bring up the kind of 50-50 ratio as much as they can. And even with doing that, they're only reaching 37% of women in the Paris branch at the moment. But this is successful and it's working. They've replicated it all around the world. And we're at this moment where all of our teaching practices have been turned upside down. We've been forced to embrace new ways of doing online learning or blended learning. And so I do look at models like that and think, we're so aware of all these imbalances and what we can do to try and open the field out. Perhaps, one could argue that gamification perhaps began in scholarship, then went outside. Maybe we bring some aspects of it back, because I think there are some very successful ideas that perhaps we could use to innovate and to open the field out a little bit more. So that was one of the points I raised in the first part of my talk on kind of the online collaboration aspect in citizen science. The other thing I just wanted to mention really briefly was the experience of doing the public transcription competition last year, because again, I essentially had to sell medieval French to a bunch of cybersecurity and IT experts. And I was very worried from the beginning that this was going to be a terrible failure, but in actual fact, it was a success. And there were people who perhaps used to be medievalists and then rediscovered they actually loved transcribing. We had some children. I suppose I'm fortunate that I'm based in Luxembourg, so I had a bilingual child and a French child in the audience, and one of them insisted on getting their father to purchase a medieval French dictionary after the event. So, and then afterwards there was interesting debate on cybersecurity and online safety, and it was great in a way, because it was bringing people into academia, but it was also putting digital projects, digital humanities, in this broader context in which society finds itself now, in that we are in a period where there are more risks. We have to be aware that cybersecurity attacks are really a lot more frequent now, so we've got to be aware about working safely, whether we're in our institutions or we're working from home. And moving on to kind of the last topic that I broached was data protection. And I think perhaps one thing I should have brought out more strongly in the talk was that, of course, we all have slightly different interpretations of data protection, because of course if we're looking at it from a UK context or an EU context, we automatically associate that with data privacy. Whereas if we're, and apologies for my cat, if we are perhaps looking at it from a US perspective or elsewhere around the globe, we might think more broadly about data protection, meaning data preservation, availability, responsiveness, and confidentiality as being a part of it. So the reason that I wanted to bring this topic to attention was not to bore you senseless, and I apologise that it's not great talking about legal judgments. However, I do think it's really important that we know about what's going on, we keep an eye on what's going on, and we also just perhaps if we've got projects that involve collecting personal data, and I also mean if you've just got a project which uses data analytics, or perhaps if you've been possibly sometimes transferring some data via other social media networks that you talk to your colleagues on, like WhatsApp or Facebook or Google or whatever it might be, just pause and have a look at the structure of your project, how you're actually working now, and just be absolutely clear that what you're doing is fine from your data protection officer's perspective. And also, if you're really worried about the potential consequences of what might happen if there isn't an adequacy decision from the EU in terms of the UK's data protection regime, which they've said they may give by the end of the year, but we'll have to see, because it's quite a long process with a number of steps. If the UK becomes a third country, obviously that has implications for data transfers. If it's going to be judged adequate from the EU, that makes things slightly easier. And the other judgment that I talked about was the one that happened this July regarding the Facebook case, where the US data privacy shield was invalidated. Now, again, it may not affect a lot of your projects depending on how they're structured, but what I can tell you is that a lot of the general advice at the moment is to look at things on a case-by-case basis. So again, if your project was set up and it relies on on that privacy shield, perhaps just go and talk to the people in your institution who are responsible, and just reassure yourself that everything is okay, or whether you may need to just keep an eye on things. The European Data Protection Board have said that they are going to issue more guidance on supplementary measures which may be needed beyond the standard contractual clauses. And really, just to end on kind of throwing a question out there, I would be really fascinated just to know what everyone thinks about data transfer mechanisms. Are the ones that you're using at the moment, do you think, are they sufficient? Do you see them changing going forward into the future? And what are they in principle at the moment? Are they mostly relying on kind of using exceptions? Are you using the standard contractual clauses at all? Are you using ad hoc clauses? I mean, it'd just be interesting to have that discussion, just to get a sense of where we are and where we might need to get to. And I'm very conscious that we had a very exciting vision painted by Michael. So we have to make sure that between now and there we can still work together and send our data if we need to. And I'm going to hand it back now.
Is there anybody who wants to come in on that very important question, either about standardization or about Emma's very, very tricky question about how to work better together? Is there anybody who's got any immediate reactions to that? Because one question I was going to ask Emma while you were talking is, do you know about any projects that have gone wrong, or when people want their data back or withdraw cooperation for whatever reason? We're living in a world where there are sharp political divides, even here in Europe. But I mean, I can see all sorts of cases where collaborative projects get pulled, even though they've already been done, and how one unscrambles any of that? Is that something that we should be thinking and worried about? Is that about just getting the contracts set up right at the beginning rather than ad hoc clauses, as you mentioned?
Well, I think for new projects, it's really important to make sure that you kind of work through in a systematic way. You know, if you are going to collect personal data, just to really work through, make sure you understand what data it is that you're collecting, and if you are collecting personal data, then you go through the data protection impact assessment, and then but I mean, really the person to speak to is your data protection officer in your institution. And to be honest, I think probably nowadays I would imagine that in most institutions there is a tried and tested procedure for having an interaction with your data protection specialists as part of applying for funding. I think my concern is I'm guessing there will be projects that were set up earlier that, you know, perhaps, and to be honest, nobody expected this privacy shield to be struck down. It was a very big shock this summer. So I'm not aware of anyone complaining of data breaches on academic projects. But I think it's important to think about right now, and really to just think about this broader point about we've all been working together, sending data, and we've been quite spoiled in a way. You know, it's been quite easy to work in this way, and also I suppose with the UK, we're still in this transition period where nothing's actually changed yet, but it will. So we've got to really make sure that we can continue to work together, and I think there's willingness. You know, I hear it from all sides that, you know, everybody wants to find a solution, but we have to. This is a time to really speak out and possibly to fight for it. And I think if people are advising funders, or perhaps are in the room with ministers, it's really important to make the point loud and clear that we need to work together and be able to send data. And I think this COVID-19 situation has certainly reminded us all of how important it is to be able to share knowledge. But you know, that goes to the whole academy.
That's great. Thanks, Emma. There's a comment on the side from Nancy Turner about why scientists are expected and get rewarded for collaboration, whereas we in humanities are not, and whether there are ways in which we should be working out a common position of how to deal with that. I don't know if anybody has a comment on that. Otherwise, I'd like, oh yes, okay, Michael, and then I'd like Jane to come in next, if that's okay, Jane. So you've got a few moments to prepare yourself. But Michael, yes, please.
Yeah, the one thing that struck me is that part of the structure of scientific research, though, is that it is extremely hierarchical. There is someone who applies for the grant, and he hires a dozen people to work in the lab for him and so on. And some of them may get their names put in as co-authors of the study. But it means that until you become a senior scholar, you are not doing your own research. You're not chasing down questions that have occurred to you. You are chasing down questions that someone has hired you to do. So it looks cooperative, but there are ways in which it is not, in fact, cooperative. It's patriarchal, and that needs to be kept in mind.
I think that's a very good point. Jane, can we come to you about your observations, comments, opportunities, or challenges?
Well, first of all, I have no expertise in the sort of things that you've been talking about. I'm a fascinated bystander, absolutely dazzled by the possibilities that the work that you do open up. And I would like to come back to Emma's paper just briefly, if I may. It seems to me that one of the things we can usefully do is exactly that sort of public engagement. It's increasingly the case, I think, in universities, particularly in this country anyway, that medievalism is not necessarily felt to be vital or fundamental. I was very struck many years ago when Manchester University, which used to be a a hotbed of French medieval research, now says that literature really begins in 1800. You know, there's a little bit of room for Molière or Racine, but there is no medievalist, and they consider, there are no 16th century specialists, they don't consider that that's of any particular value. And one of the things I think we need to do as medievalists is public engagement, which recognizes that if we're to continue with our particular lines of research, it's important that the reasonably educated general public can see that we're doing things that are interesting, useful, exciting. I worry that I think many people have mentioned that young scholars are now finding it increasingly difficult, I think, to find career paths in universities. I just wonder how much we could do to engage the public. I like the idea of crowd mapping the Crusades, which I think was Emma's topic, or rather the research project in which she'd been involved. Somebody yesterday talked about engaging the public and public involvement by training those who are interested or excited amateurs in the sorts of things you can do with archives and ways in which you can involve yourselves in a particular project enterprise. I think that we have, particularly those of us who are senior, or in my case, very senior medievalists, one of the things that we might try and do, I think, is to ensure that the public, that universities recognize that this isn't rather recondite stuff, but it's actually stuff that is interesting, exciting, worth spending time, money on. And one of the ways in which this can be done, I think, is via the sorts of things that you people have been talking about in the course of these 3 days, where there are so many very exciting projects which possibly need spreading around rather more among the general public who doesn't really know much about it. And I include myself actually in that particular category. I do worry about whether medievalists, the expertise, the experts that we need for all these things that we do, how much they will be replaced when they reach, you know, a rather more advanced age. And I think that would be, it would be very sad and something that we really need to think about.
Thank you for the question, Jane. No, it was, I have to say, I mean, I was really surprised last year when I organised the event, because in theory, it made total sense to me. I thought, well, I'm living in Luxembourg. All the children speak at least 3 or 4 languages. And actually, I only had 2 children that attended in the end. And so, but I mean, only last week I had an email from an IT consultant asking me if it was finished, and you know, could he help, or could he kind of put it on his social media network. And so so yeah, there was genuine interest, and I do think I think perhaps picking up on some of the comments that Roger made yesterday, I do think there is actually a vast array of people out there who, you know, do actually really love literature, and you know, they've just not had an opportunity to spend any time on it for a while. And so I think the challenge probably is designing some sort of taster that doesn't take too long, perhaps, you know, maybe I don't know, a 2-hour session or something like that, and really just to see, you know, how things go. I mean, I have to say it's interesting, because you do get a whole range of reactions. Some people will just have a go, no problem. Others are really reticent. They don't like the idea of being marked or judged or compared with others if it's something that they don't have previous knowledge in. So no, it was fun, because I ended up doing a mini tutorial at the beginning, and it was quite a lot of work to put together, but no, I do think the general idea could be replicated across all manner of projects. I think perhaps it's not a bad idea combining it with something else, just so that you're going to draw a wider public in to begin with, and then hopefully you find that the some people who came for a different reason find that actually, you know, the medieval text is good fun.
Great. I mean, there's a lot to talk about here, and that public engagement and advocacy, not just at general public or political, but also at university level, I think is absolutely crucial. I mean, anecdotally, you know, we do very well. Medieval studies is still extremely popular, and you know, thank goodness, partly because of these new innovations in how we look at the world, and you know, it's a vibrant, busy subject. But clearly, there are ways in which we need to make sure that, I mean, I remember talking to David Canada when he was president of the British Academy, and I can't remember how many cabinet ministers had humanities degrees, but basically they all follow the immortal words of Charles Clarke when he was education secretary, who said famously that he didn't mind having one or two medievalists for ornamentational purposes here and there, but didn't need them anywhere else. And you know, you don't need to be a genius to be thinking about how one reads the Quran, how one tries to understand all these movements that are sprung up in the contemporary world that fetishize parts of the Middle Ages, to think that it's quite an interesting conversation, quite an interesting time to be looking at this interesting period. But I'd like to go to three scholars now who have got also experience of using data science to look backwards at manuscripts and at texts and at their own subjects. Damon Ritchik, would you like to talk us through your experiences too, and then maybe we go to Mike and then finally to Justin.
Sure, thank you. Can I start by sharing there, is this being shared? I just wanted to share two pictures from Elaine's talk, Elaine's keynote. Two graphics which illustrate two different aspects of looking at manuscripts. I should say, first of all, I'm not a medievalist. Don't even work in digital humanities. I'm a data scientist. I spend my time proving theorems. So I'm delighted to hear all this stuff. These two pictures struck me. On the left, there's the manuscript as a physical object. And on the right, there's the digital aspect, a statistical plot of a collection of manuscripts. And these two views, they give us very different things. The plot on the right, as Zoe said, the great thing about statistical data is you can search and sort and filter, and therefore you can extract useful results. But the physicality of the manuscript, it offers something more. It offers something about, it's something to do with how our bodies interact with the object in what the William Gibson would call in meat space. So what does this have to do with visualization, data science, investigation of the digital side of archives? I think I can stop the show now. The first thing I want to talk about is the tangibility. Physical objects have an obvious tangibility. You can reach out and touch them. Data should have a tangibility also. When I see that scatter plot, I want to reach out. I want to touch points. I want to shift my head to get a different perspective. I want to grab a group of points. I want to tease apart and look into it. The data should have its own physicality. That's what's compelling about the cyberspace arcologies that Michael Sargent referred to. It's not that, hey, it lets us see in 3D. It's that because we're in 3D, it lets us use the instincts, our brains that evolution has given us to reach out and touch things in 3D. That's what really matters. I want to stop hearing view, visualize, see, and read. I want to start hearing touch, handle, manipulate. And if we're talking about digital humanities, these are the digits that we should be caring about. So that's one side. Tangible data. That's what digital humanities needs. That's what data science as a whole needs to push towards. The other remarkable thing about those two views, the actual book, the scatter plot, is the relationship between the two of them. So I'll use the word synecdoche for this. The relationship between the instance and the whole. You can see when you look at the scatter plot, you can see things that you would never ever pick up if you just handle the manuscripts one by one. You need to be able to see the whole ensemble of everything. But on the other hand, the scatterplot is just plain sterile, unless you can dig in. So sometimes when I hear talks from digital humanities, it feels like there's this attitude, I can tabulate, therefore I can understand, which is just wrong. Zoe made the point very well. She said, statistical analysis is best used in conjunction with manual methods, as the human element can be difficult to determine from the statistics. So when I see a scatter plot, what I'm thinking is behind each of these dots on the screen, there's a narrative, there's a story, and our brains have become hardwired through evolution to understand stories. They understand stories, not statistics. This isn't something which is purely a human faculty though. This is something where computers, where AI, data science should be able to help us. What I want is something which makes it easy on the screen to jump from a group to a representative individual of that group to help me understand the story behind the group. Or alternatively, I pull out a few interesting cases and then the computer says, this is the group, this is the category that those individuals exemplify. I want this to be tangible and direct. I reach out and then the computer says, hey, this is the category which you have defined through your choice. Michael Sargent talked about cyberspace wanting to navigate a series of links between items. That's not the navigation we need to worry about. We need to worry about the navigation between items and categories and then back to items. So this is something which calls for substantial developments in data science visualization. It needs AI to do that sort of thing for us automatically. When we have something like this that people can use, then investigating these archives in a deep, meaningful, quantitative way should be something that everyday people can do, rather than something that coders can do. At the moment, I mean, it's just crazy that the only way to understand these things is to sit there with screenfuls of code in front of you. It shouldn't be like that. This is what data visualization should really be about. It's how can we build the computer tools that will leverage what our brain has developed, the evolutionary instincts for tangible stuff and for synecdoche, for stories and for handling things, to understand the contents of archives. Thank you.
Great. I mean, one of my takeaways, both from this conference, but also over the last, I don't know, 5 or 10 years, I suppose, has been that, you know, when I was a graduate student and started, you know, early career scholar, the technical skills I needed to understand were material culture, numismatics, sigillography, paleography, and so on. I think it's now clear that it's almost impossible to be a sort of all singing, all dancing historian without having a much better grounding in mathematics, statistics, and the sciences. You know, we see this with climate data, but also any form of visualization. Too many people in the humanities have been detached from the sciences since they were teenagers. And you have to take on trust how to use and how to best deal with statistical models. And I think that how we keep on learning, how we keep on accumulating those skills is a really important element to fuse, you know, to stop this idea that there's a distinction between humanities and the sciences, but to work and to learn from each other. I think there's an important point there to make too. But Mike, why don't you come at us next and give us your thoughts on what you've heard and following on from your presentation too on lost texts and so on, which is a real revelation. I hadn't crossed my mind about insularity and so on. So I've got a lot to think about tonight when I can't sleep.
Yeah, can you hear me? So maybe I wanted to contribute a very naive, optimistic note. In the sense, I was looking at the sessions, I was thinking about the future, and I really think it's a very exciting time to be a medievalist, one of the most exciting times ever, maybe. If you look at the possibilities that we have now, the resources, the instruments, I think people like Lachmann, they could only have dreamed about this. And I'm saying this because I noticed that in some of the presentations and discussions, we were becoming very critical of the digital medium. We were very much focusing on what the technology can't do right now. Whereas if you think about it, the things that we can do now, if I compare that to the time when I was a student, it isn't that long ago. And I think that the Book of Kells was one of the few manuscripts that was digitized in the world. You had to pay £50 for a CD-ROM that would only arrive 3 months later. So the immediacy of access that we have now is amazing. And I think we have to stay optimistic and be critical, of course, but I think we shouldn't forget how amazing it is to be a medievalist right now. And I think that the main thing for the future, the primary goal that this technology allows is transparency. So I think we can be much more transparent about our work. We can share our data in much more sustainable and explicit ways. And I think that this is a primary skill that we all already possess to a certain extent, but we can increase that, I think. And especially we have to teach that attitude of openness and transparency to our students, because they will inherit the data sets that we are curating now. And so that's what I wanted to say. So that I think we can be very optimistic. I think we're doing well also as medievalists. If you look at the achievements of just the last decade, that's amazing. And I think we have to stay optimistic and also teach our students that optimism.
I'm tempted to call the session to an end and we all run to the nearest pub to end on an upbeat note, which I do agree that we should sometimes remind ourselves the glass is half full. And it's a very good point about the immediacy, the way in which we can access materials, primary, secondary. It's incredible. It's of course very closely connected to the superabundance, where it's like disappearing down a rabbit hole. You know, you can download 25 articles in less than 10 minutes and keep yourself busy for weeks, and it can be overwhelming sifting out, particularly when they're all good quality, written by very clever people. So, but I agree that it's much preferable being able to do how we do things, even if it's not perfect, even if there are ways which we can improve. Justin, I'm sorry to come to you last. You've been waiting patiently, but how about you? Would you like to take us through to the sort of final discussion? And while Justin speaks, I think if you can all think about topics and questions you'd like to talk about, if you want to lead rather than let me guide. I've got a long list of topics to talk about. This is your session, not mine. But Justin, over to you.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Yes. So let me just echo Mike's optimism to start, because we really are in an extraordinary age for all forms of textual scholarship, and not just because of the manuscripts that we have available, but also, and I don't think this can ever be underestimated, how we have instant access to the entire record of scholarship on those texts, right? So we have instant access to the scholarship of the Renaissance, of the 16th, 17th, 18th, 19th, into the early 20th century, just like that. So we can see a whole history of inquiry just like that. We can see how the ideas that we took for granted previously, actually came to develop. And that makes me, a lot of us who work on manuscripts, and a lot of the talks at this conference so far is focused on the individual characteristics of manuscripts and their readers, right? How did different readers leave their mark on the material that they were studying? And, that's a form of scholarly sustainability when you think about it, right? These people thought about these texts and they left their thoughts on their text in such a way that we, 1,000 years later, actually have access to what they were doing with these texts, what they thought about them, how they worked with them. And so the question, I think, comes for us, is anyone going to know in the future what we thought about these texts, how we dealt with these texts, etc.? And I think that's where this scholarly sustainability point really comes into its own. In sustainability, right? I mean, what you're trying to do is maximize the use of existing infrastructure where the costs are already built in, as opposed to the costs that are needed to set up new infrastructures. And in that, I think there's a real question to be asking ourselves: what is the most sustainable way to disseminate and to preserve the scholarship that we're doing? And sadly, maybe not sadly, that often means a book. It means a printed object, right? A physical object that be kept in repositories that we already have distributed through mechanisms that are already existing, right? You know, so much scholarship, as we've seen and discussed today, has been essentially lost and rendered inaccessible in only 30 years, 35 years of, you know, digital approaches to scholarship. And so there, I think when we're thinking about the ways to disseminate, we shouldn't necessarily assume that lack of physicality is the future. We can be pretty certain that the books that we have right now are going to be destroyed, gone, and the manuscripts that we study will still be there because they were books that ultimately were built to last. And maybe we should think about that a little more when we think about how we want our own scholarship and the way we think about these texts to be kept for the future. And then the other point, which is the more pessimistic point that I would like to make is, you know, I totally take the idea that, you know, in our training as scholars, we do need to take into account statistical and computational methods into account. But the question is, to my mind, right, in our disciplines, where do the starting points come from? Where do we get the questions, right? Oftentimes, the way it works right now, and for very good reason, is that the questions come from our traditional disciplinary studies, right? And then we look around for a method to address those questions and answer them. And that's, for most of us, where we get into digital methods, right? We have a question, how do we answer this question? And we find, oh, look, there's a method here that works. And I worry that if, you know, we try to remake some forms of scholarly training such that we de-emphasize these traditional disciplinary things, where are the questions going to come from? Are we going to make scholars who are really, really good at coming up with methods, but they don't have these burning questions that the methods could actually be used to solve? So that's just a slight cautionary note to maybe take into account.
And just to come back on that, Justin, I mean, I think all of us heartened by the idea of physicality and books surviving. I'm sure that is right. I mean, there's a wider question about the role of university presses in particular, about the prices they charge for monographs, and therefore putting the gate and the bar so high on the cost of knowledge that it puts us all in a bunker no matter what, because no one can buy and read our books except for in rarefied university libraries, and even that becomes an issue. Do you think do you see that this public widening of the discussion to include all different areas outside the narrow halls of scholarship is an important one? How do you think we best break those down?
Yeah, I mean, you know, I really admire the people who are publishing with open access platforms, and particularly ones that allow for a multimodal dissemination, right? So that the libraries that will buy the print book actually do buy the print book, so there is some kind of repository that has them, but then anyone else can just go on and get the PDFs and read it if they want to read it. I think that's a really admirable model, and obviously there are problems of, you know, making books, especially well-edited books, you know, that have a decently high standard, costs money, and that money has to come from somewhere. But these are problems that can be solved and have been solved in different ways before, right? The university press model is not the only model that's ever been there for the dissemination of scholarship. I mean, if you look at things statistically, it's really interesting. The print run of a scholarly book, okay, that was published in this decade is exactly the same as a print run of a scholarly book that was published in 1550. I mean, in a way, we have seen absolutely no increase of the market. You know, it's about between 800 to 1,500 copies actually sold, right? And, you know, and that's okay because with those 16th century books, they were scattered through enough repositories that they had a decent survival rate. In the same way, I think, you know, all we need is that 1,000 copies out there in the long run for some repositories to keep a hold of them, etc. And then we can talk about technological means, you know, to get more people to have access to them.
Well, so I'd like to throw it for questions. There's a very active chat bar. I know all the panelists are keeping an eye on it because they're popping up from time to time. But I think if anybody is out there would like to ask a specific question, please put it in the chat bar now. We've got about just under a quarter of an hour to talk. And ideally, I think as broad a question as possible so all the panelists can have a discussion. And I think questions only rather than observations, because my eyesight's not as good as it was, so I don't like staring at it anyway. But please feel free to put something there. Otherwise, if anybody on the panel would like to have a go and start with a question, put your hand up. Otherwise, I'll ask Elaine. I mean, what Justin's saying, I mean, these physical copies of books, you made the point in your presentation and alluded to the fact that it had set the cat amongst the pigeons too, about the value of the document if it's been digitized. You know, what do we do with these texts? Are they the same thing? Are they separate to be studied in a scholarly way? You know, there was no mention, I think, in the last 2 or 3 days about restitution or about where the homes of some of these texts and documents should be, which is a whole can of worms in its own right. But I mean, that we know is in a material culture is the single discussion that dominates everything, and yet conspicuous by its absence. Do you have any views either, I think, on what happens to text once they're digitized, and go into that a bit more that you mentioned in your presentation, or about whether this is a topic which we should be thinking and talking about too, either with reference to medieval documents or texts or more widely?
So, I mean, those are huge topics, aren't they? My view is, I've come around to this view over many years of thinking, that the digital object is, you know, is different. It's completely different. It's as different from the manuscript as an Early English Text Society edition is, right? They're different editions, in effect, aspects, they're different perspectives on the physical artifact in the repository. And just different doesn't mean less good than, different means different. I think in scholarship at the moment, we're really finding it hard to have kind of antithetical things in play at the same time. The either or becomes good and bad. And in fact, you can have things, you can hold things in tension and recognize that tension, and productive thinking can come out of that tension. I was really interested in the comments with the slide that was shown with the visualization on one hand and my own photograph, Bodily 343, on the other. The visualization is itself, I love that idea of kind of going in and kind of like, you know, digitally manipulating it. And of course, that is what one can do with these visualizations, is to kind of zoom right into an individual year to see what was happening in book history. And they have a life, and the digital has a materiality of its own. So it is not immaterial. It is itself intangible. Bits and bytes are intangible, but we're nevertheless closely connected. I think this is a skeuomorphic that bothers me a little bit, and I think that is holding things back somewhat. But that's again a different discussion. The issue of restitution is really interesting in the light of the reconstitution of manuscripts online. So the obvious example is the Codex Sinaiticus, which has been digitally reconstructed, and so now exists for the first time as a book in its own right. And I'm sure there must be somebody on the panel who knows much more about this than I do. My point would simply be that we know that it was appropriated in the 19th century, or the parts that are no longer at the monastery in the Sinai desert were appropriated in the 19th century. And I cannot see, okay, like this, you know, it's an issue, isn't it? I cannot see any reason why you wouldn't give those things back now, so that the manuscript can itself be reconstituted, since we have digital instantiations of the volume. At least, what day is it today? Thursday. On this Thursday, I think that one could argue for restitution of some objects. It's a huge issue. I think when I talked about collaboration, and Emma said, well, we all collaborate anyway. Yes, we do all collaborate, and especially in research projects that the UK and Europe are so very good at, and have been so good at for decades now. We do all collaborate, but there is collaboration and collaboration. And I'm thinking about collaboration on a kind of global scale, where we would talk to libraries, where we would think about ways to repair competitions, or to repair appropriations, and to repair damage done through colonialism and other forms of social and cultural oppression. So collaboration also across disciplines in normal and natural everyday ways that kind of count for the way that we move forward. So I'm not sure even then that collaboration is the right word for it, but either way, interesting questions, Peter. I don't have any real answers, and for me, I change my mind quite a lot, and I think that that's okay too. And when I talked yesterday about scholarship being provisional, I really meant it, and I wonder what everybody else thinks.
Who wants to be brave and throw themselves into the midst? I mean, I suppose one of the follow-up question, and I think that's exactly right. There are no easy answers, but when we start thinking about how one preserves the life of a digital project and how one plans the resources and costs it, we can see it doesn't take much to think, well, if you've digitized a library collection, the Bodleian or wherever it might be, and you've preserved it therefore for generations, then the original document has notional less value. It's much harder to get your curators in when you have funders who might say, well, you've got what you need, and let people all over the world look at the manuscript, and they might as well see it for real. And I assume the way we're going, we'll be able to generate 3D copies subject to copyright and so on in due course that are facsimiles in as good condition and less fragile than the original. But the cost of maintaining these documents is expensive. It's difficult to do. There are huge technical skills. It's not the most glamorous job in the world to try and tell people that's what you do at drinks and dinner parties, but it's absolutely critical. And without it, we're all out of our jobs. And yet it's the skeleton on which we all build and put the muscle. So I think trying to work through what are the logical consequences of this wonderful pioneering age where we can get access to information, but we're not, I think, thinking through the whole way of the process of how do we do that. And the next session after this is with some of the big donors in this field, and it'd be great, I think, to get their idea of what they think happens next to physical objects, because the most expensive thing in any kind of scholarship is human beings and funding, and particularly to have early career scholars who come in. Yeah, Emma, thank goodness. Yeah, somebody else, and put your hands up if you want to come in. Emma, you're on.
No, I wanted to, I suppose, respond to Elaine's comments. I mean, I to be honest, when I said that, wasn't really, I was just thinking more in terms of working together and how precious it is that this situation that we've enjoyed for quite a long time. And I just think as scholars, it would just be terrible if, it's just so much harder to work with colleagues and friends in the States or around Europe or Asia or wherever it might be. And I suppose just wanted to flag it up as something that we really need to protect now, make sure that the decisions that are made in the next year or so don't actually make it really difficult for the people behind us or for the next however long. But the other thing I wanted to respond to was Mike's point, because I do think he's quite right. We really have to keep the sense of excitement and joy in what we're doing. And it is pretty amazing that now when we start with a new project, and you might think about manuscript circulation, for instance, so instead of just kind of sitting down with a pen and paper and writing about all the existing codices and where they're currently held and where they were held and what the provenance history was, you can actually just tabulate it in Excel, and you might think, well, it would be really great if I could see this. And there are programs in Python that you can use just to look at where these manuscripts were and where they've moved to. And the fact that we can actually do it is incredible. And when you think about how in this period of lockdown, there have been parts of it which have been quite amazing, where you kind of you start with a problem, and then you'll talk to one colleague in one jurisdiction and another one in another, and then you find a way through what you're trying to do. And the fact that we've actually been able to do it is pretty amazing. So we are a resilient body, and there's no reason why we can't go on being so, but we've just got to keep our eye on the prize, which is being able to do what we do.
Great. Does anybody else have any final thoughts or comments or questions they'd like to share? Well, you've all dazzled. It's been brilliant.
I raised my hand, but you probably didn't see it.
Can you wave? Who's that?
It's Ulrike. Hello.
Oh, sorry, Ulrike. Please, yes.
It's not really final thoughts, but saw some comments going on in the chat, taking up also the issue of books and open access and pricing and which libraries who pay for all the publications. Actually, I would like to add something. I think also Mike said, we are raising a new generation. And we need to have more discussions about openness and transparency, not only with the students, with early career researchers, and yes, also with the senior researchers. I mean, it's hard to reach them. We cannot really say here is a course on open access, why it's important, and now all the professors come in. It's a problem, but we need to have those discussions, because if the senior scholars still sign away all their rights and publish with reports or whatever you want to say, and it costs lots of money and it's not open access, this sets a standard also in the committees where people are valued. And so if we want a change, it also has to come top down. It's not only the young generation who is very flexible, but also the most endangered, but it's really also the senior scholars. And in the end, it's also the funders. But the funders, at least in Europe, they have made a move, which is towards open access, but with a kind of problem involved, because it doesn't really take into account the systematic faultiness of academia at the moment.
Well, listen, I think that it's been a terrific 3 days, and all of you on this session, extremely candid and very eloquent to talk through some of these issues. They're all big ticket and I suspect probably not fixable today, but I think it's very important to have these kind of dialogues so that we are able to express and listen to different opinions. And I think it's been a very fruitful and constructive discussion. I'd like to thank all of you for taking part, particularly those who made presentations that you've been thanked already, but also for the speakers who've come in, who've listened and shared their thoughts too. Stephen Pink, who helped set up the conference, along with Julie, Josefina and Anthony Lappin, thank you. And Henrik, of course, from OM, Oxford Medieval Studies. I'm going to end after thank you by handing over to Jane Taylor. We're all very grateful, those listening to the Society for the Study of Medieval Languages and Literature, for publishing Medium Even, but also for facilitating this really important discussion, and I hope future ones too that follow up. So I now thank you for having me. I'm very grateful to be involved. I've learned a lot and make me think a great deal. I'll hand you over to Jane for some final words, but thank you very much for a terrific session.
Thanks, Peter.
Thank you very much, Peter. I'm at the moment president of the Society for the Study of Medieval Languages and Literature, which, as you know, publishes Medium Even, founded, as it happens, in 1932 by a group of scholars who included C.S. Lewis and J.R.R. Tolkien. So they were very good at public engagement, weren't they? And I wanted to thank, on behalf of the Society, so many speakers and participants who've, as I say, spoken on an eye-watering variety of topics. I've been very much impressed, just listening, by the sort of drive and enthusiasm, excitement and joy we just heard among the participants. The drive that their various enterprises shows, their ingenuity, I think, in using AI methods to manage problems of all sorts within medieval studies. And I think all of us have very much enjoyed the debates and are very happy to understand, especially for digital novices like me, to understand at least a little of what it is that you people are working on and doing so extraordinarily, excitingly well with. So I would like to thank, first of all, on behalf of the Society, the speakers and the participants, who it seems to me have thrown themselves with such, again, excitement and joy into the whole process of this conference. But I do want to add to what Peter said, to thank those who've actually made this whole enterprise happen. It's Henrietta Lehnemann, Juliana Dresvina, Anthony Lappin, Andrew Dunning, and of course, especially Stephen Pink, who I rather think has managed the whole technical side of this conference with quite extraordinary ingenuity in his own part and drive.
That's very kind of you.
You have, Stephen. It's been absolutely remarkable. Stephen is, among other things, the executive officer of the Society, and it's, I think, very largely his drive which has set this whole enterprise off. And I think the people who have put this all together have done a remarkable administrative job. I don't think I've ever been to a Zoom-based conference which has been quite so seamless. I usually expect that people will be dropped off the screen or disappear or be unheard, and all of that has worked perfectly. So I just want, because I can't, I'm afraid, stay till the end of the conference, right at the end, I just want to say how much I think this conference will have been admired by all of us, inspired all of us, and shown just what can be done with the new tools at the disposal of scholars. And I wish I was a little bit younger, and I might well throw myself into the same enterprise. But thank you very much to Stephen and to all the organisers. I don't think they're all here, are they, Stephen?
I think Juliana has childcare.
Yeah, of course.
She isn't here.
Yeah.
But I think everybody else, it's our big team,
yeah.
All the way from Colorado to Germany.
That certainly says Henrika is there. So thank you very much on behalf of the Society for the Study of Medieval Languages and Literature and of Medium even, for the work and the enthusiasm that has gone into this whole event.
Thank you.
Thank you all very much. Thanks, everybody.